Welcome, everybody, to another midweek teaching. And today we're going to discuss the definition of love. So as we've talked about, we've said, well, the new covenant, the eternal law, the new law of 70 AD is rooted in love others as yourself. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But we need to know a little bit better what the definition of love is. And here's the great news. I don't have to speculate. We can just simply go to the scriptures, and that's what we're going to do. All right, so here we are in 1 Corinthians 13, all right? And this is what I want to do. I want to focus on love, and then we're going to measure it out. And I might even use some examples, right, where the law of love is violated, okay? And we can talk about that as we read the definition according to our textual authority. That's the scriptures right here. So we're going to start here in verse 4. Love is patient. Okay? So are you, quick with an unsubscribe button, right? And this would be to not only brothers and sisters out there in Christ, it could be, I'm speaking to everybody, right? Are you patient? Because that's what love is. Love is patient. And by the way, as we move forward, remember, God is love. Therefore, God is patient. Do you see that? I hope you do. And as we move forward, try to think of that God is love, algebraic hermeneutics, and therefore God is patient. You see? You can make these applications here. Now, love is kind, right? Pretty simple, direct, love is kind. Now, so for example, if you're facing a situation where people are doing things, right? And we can come up with a lot of subjects that are unkind. People were being unkind when they were trying to force my family to take certain concoctions of medicine that we didn't choose was a good idea for us. It's called medical privacy and informed consent. And apparently people were being very unkind when we exercised our civil liberty to our informed consent. And if in any shape, way, or form, you're harming someone else, whether it be a little one or a large person, it doesn't matter. That's not kind. So you're violating the law of love. Love is not jealous. Keep in mind, folks, that there is such thing as a godly jealousy, and a godly jealousy, I would suggest, is someone who wants to protect, right? So a parent who wants to make sure their children are okay and safe and things of that nature and be a little bit more protective. I'm going to say that there's a zone there, but God is not jealous in the sense of trying to, overlord, right? Because he's patient, he's kind. Well, that's what love is. Love is not jealous, all right? Love does not brag and is not arrogant. Now, I don't mind saying this. There's certain propagandas that exist these days. I call it the alphabet parades, okay? And some people want to suggest that that's somehow love. No, you actually name it boastful. You're naming it prideful, arrogance. That's what you're naming it. So I'll give you that. At least you're being quite direct and honest. That being said, that's not love. That's propagation, right? Because you're being boastful. You're bragging. You're imposing things upon people that maybe some folks don't want to hear or don't want to know about or don't need to hear, but you're doing it in a braggy, arrogant way, right? So that's not love. So you can use that, right? You can use that. Say, look, I know you're trying to call that love, but it's not, because you're being arrogant and you're being pushy and you're being extremely prideful to try to push your agenda on folks that, quite frankly, are just trying to go about their day. So privacy is privacy, intimacy is intimacy. That should be in, between the four walls. But when you're, parading around and, putting feathers on your head and exposing your posteriors potentially or anything like that, well, that's just showboating. That's arrogant. That's braggy. And that's not love. See, you violated the law of love there. And I would suggest that everybody needs to pay attention to this. This is for anybody and everybody, as far as I'm concerned. And this is the problem when people don't see the scriptures as a textual authority. What they end up doing is inventing their own definition of love and saying, well, this is love. And then they abide by that. And I'm like, no, that's not love. That's not love. That's you being extremely unkind. And that's you being very arrogant. And that's you being very prideful. And by the way, you're not very patient because you're not even hearing me out, right? So these are the types of things that are violating the law of love. So I'm not talking about that love your neighbor as yourself and love works no ill is a frou-frou love. I don't need to do that. I can go right to the scriptures, right to the textual authority and go, this is it. And when you're violating that, bingo, bango, I know you're not abiding in the law of love. Okay? So this is for everybody. Okay? And by the way, I would include secular humanists and atheists. As far as I'm concerned, when you're doing these types of things, and this includes Christians, of course, anybody, I don't care who you are, you're violating the law of love right here. It does not act disgracefully. So if you're going on some live television show of some kind or an award show, for example, right, and you're doing some kind of mocking, right, of anybody who maybe some people really adore or love. So for example, I don't want to get into too many details because I don't like to get distracted with it, but when there's mockeries of the Last Supper, or you're taking someone like Jesus, and I've seen like awful memes and stuff like that, that's you acting disgracefully, okay? Any kind of public form of, again, arrogance, and when you're essentially going to anger or upset, right, people because they see, for example, Jesus as their Lord. And when you do some kind of mockery and you post it on social media, or you go on an award show and do something like that, you're acting disgracefully, because you're not going to convince me you didn't know that when you were doing that, there was going to be anywhere up to 2 billion people. There were going to be a little upset that you would do such a thing, because you're not considering the other person's position. And so now you are acting disgracefully. Okay, it's not because you didn't know. When you do things like that, you know that Jesus is adored by a lot of folks, and that when you act disgracefully towards him or their tradition and understanding, the Last Supper, for example, like I said, then you're acting disgracefully and you're violating the law of love. Now, same thing with Christians, by the way, just letting you know that if you're, going around and wagging your finger at everybody all the time and being very loud and arrogant and pushy, and you're doing that publicly especially, and you're shaming people, then you're acting disgracefully. So we have to be careful with this. Everybody does. This is indeed the law of love, and this is the definition of love, and God does not act disgracefully, right? So we shouldn't either. It does not seek its own benefit. Watch out for the agendas. Watch out for the agendas. Okay? Anytime I see people pushing their own agenda in any kind of over-the-top aggressive way, then you're only seeking for yourself. That's self-love right there, right? So, for example, when people do anything that's for their own benefit, and it's primarily about their own benefit without any intention of helping someone else. So for example, if you're being good to yourself, like for example, one subscriber talked about a Sabbath, and he said, when I take the Sabbath or take a Sabbath, I decompress and I'm better towards other people. Well, that's awesome. See, you're doing something for yourself so that in turn you can use it to benefit others. That's wonderful. But if you're basically saying, just throwing an example out there, saying, look, I really don't care about anything you guys got going on. Whatever's better for me, I'm looking out for number one, right? That kind of thing. That love yourself so that you can love yourself some more thing. That's not love. You violated the law of love. Love doesn't seek its own benefit. Love seeks the benefit of others when there's an opportunity to do so or a way to do so. Okay? So apply it to your lives. See what your congregation is doing. And quite frankly, if there's people that are outside the faith that are trying to suggest to you that when they're trying to muzzle your children's face or whatever during like the C19 nonsense and things like that, you're like, hey, you're just trying to seek your own benefit here. This is better for you maybe, but back off. You're violating the law of love. Okay? So, and love is not provoked. So I'm going to suggest this and does not provoke and is not provoked easily, I would suggest. Okay, so I think we got to keep that in mind. So don't be too quick to foam at the mouth. I think most of the time, we should be very, very patient. And there's usually a way away. There's a way away from the problem. And if you can seek that kind of peace, that counts too. Okay? Love does not keep an account of wrong suffered. Now, this does not. So first of all, you don't keep an account. We forgive, move on. But this does not say you go back in the ring to let the person do that to you again. So don't take the text too far either. Okay, so keep it in balance. Just doesn't keep an account of wrong suffered, but you still have to be wise as a serpent, but yet harmless as a dove. So include that in there. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness. It does not rejoice in iniquity. So again, does love, rejoice when people are doing bad things or inappropriate things or violating any of the things up here, right? So if it's full of pride, if it's full of arrogance, if it's pushy, if it's unkind, if it doesn't consider, right, others, if it's always seeking its own benefit, right? These are unrighteous behaviors. You don't rejoice in any kind of immorality, okay? And so don't violate the law of love. And so there is going to be potentially unrighteous things that occur, but rejoicing in it. In other words, someone is getting, beat up or harmed in some way, and you're like, yeah, get them. That's no. What are you doing? You don't rejoice. We don't rejoice in like things like wars or whatever. Okay. So I think the definition is here, and you can apply it to your lives and watching how other people are operating, and you can make a decision whether they're violating the law of love or not. Okay. And at the same time, remember this, we don't have to get our hands dirty. So just because somebody else is violating the law of love, okay? And I do have to tell you, in Canada, and I'm speaking for my area, okay, there's a lot of folks who have belief systems that are completely violating many, one or more of the following thing, or the past things I've just mentioned. Very arrogant, very prideful, and supporting disgraceful public acts and things of this nature. And they're constantly seeking their own benefit, whatever's better for them, right? They violate that law of love all the time. Okay? But that doesn't mean I have to. Okay? So remember that. But instead rejoices in the truth. So for example, I rejoice, I'm in my garden, right? I, for example, have zucchini plants. There's the male flower and there's the female flower. The female flower has the fruit, right? The male flower has to pollinate the female flower. Why? Because there's two genders, okay? Anybody trying to expand it to 27? No, we don't rejoice in that kind of nonsense, because that's what it is, okay? Now, do people have to agree with it? Well, it's up to them, okay? Same thing in Canada, they legalized, smoking the funny stuff. Well, okay, I'm going to just truthfully tell you that if you're doing that all the time, you're going to have a very difficult time making consistent, wise decisions. Now, I can say that with the proper amount of salt, the proper amount of seasoning, but at the end of the day, if the other person says, well, in other words, what I want to say is this, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right, okay? And just because it's legal doesn't mean I have to do it. And just because it's legal doesn't mean I don't get to exercise my freedom of speech. I'm just going to suggest to you that if we're going to walk in the way of the light of Christ, we do it kindly and patiently, right? So I would express truthfully, kindly, and patiently. Listen, I think this behavior right here, I think you're going in the wrong direction. And here's why. And again, I may not have to say this to everybody. It depends if I feel moved to talk to someone, or if they've approached me, or if they open up the Pandora's box, then I'll speak. Okay? I'm not afraid to speak, and I will speak the truth, and I'll rejoice in speaking the truth. Their reaction is not going to affect the position. Okay? I don't have to get my hands dirty. Okay? So remember that. And of course, love hopes all things. Okay, I'm going to go right here. Okay. And what I love about this is this. I'm a hopeful universalist. Okay. Hopeful universalist. Some people say, oh, Shade, you're way off on this. Okay, but love hopes all things. See? So by me hoping, right, that all, right, will be reconciled to God, that all will find the light and the love of God, that God will be absolutely merciful and forgiving to whatever degree he so deems, believing that he's going to do that, hoping that he's going to do that for even those who do not care for me very much. Yes, indeed, I get to hope that. It's not me sinning, okay? I get to hope that. Why? Because love actually hopes, I think, all loving things. And that's a good thing to hope for, all right? So what I'm suggesting to you is that I'm not talking about a love your neighbor as yourself and just making up, which a lot of people, I'm going to repeat that, a lot of folks do. A lot of folks make up their own definition of love, okay? And they violate the law of love, the real law of love, the true law of love. But what they do is they make up their own version and they follow that. But that's not love. They made up their own definition. We're not doing that here. We're not doing that here on this channel. I'm using the textual authority, and I don't mind saying that I think in the spirit and in the mind and the heart and the soul, we already know that this is true. When folks are being super arrogant and braggy, they know they're violating the law of love. I really believe that they're just doing it anyways. Okay. And anybody can fall prey to these things. And this is why we want to stay in this zone right here. Okay. And love does hope all things. And that's a loving thing to do. And love, and God is love. Therefore, I can tell you directly that in this channel, this is the kind of love we're talking about. And this connects directly to love your neighbor as yourself, because love works no ill. And this is the kind of love we're talking about. But I need us to fully understand that just because somebody else is potentially violating this law of love, doesn't mean we should. Okay? And that's, I think, what we're talking about when we talk about staying on the straight path. And when Paul talks about working out our own salvation with fear and trembling and things of that nature. Don't let other people's potential impatience or unkindness, okay, or arrogance or over-the-top jealousies or disgraceful behavior or their own self-absorption, okay, and their own way of doing things and rejoicing in unrighteousness. This is what I'm talking about. If they're not rejoicing in the truth and they're spreading lies, you don't have to partake, okay? So that's what we're talking about here. This is the definition of love. And this is where I'm trying to inspire not only myself, but anybody who's listening to these messages. Understand that I'm not talking about a love that I'm picking up out of the air or making up my own definition. No, this is the definition. And I think we can apply it. And sometimes things can get a little gray in certain areas, but I think if we are careful and we think about these things, I'm going to suggest we're going to be able to really work it out where we know that when we're seeing someone violate the law of love, and how to make sure that we don't violate it. And I think one thing, by the way, I'm going to give you a hint that might help in you not violating it, by violating this law of love, is hoping all things, including the restoration of all people, because that might have you look at other people, even if they're being unkind and impatient, it might cause you to look at them still as a child of God. And then you can hope a loving hope. All right. So hopefully what I've done here, guys, because we talked about the new covenant law, right? And love your neighbor as yourself. It's very important we know what love really means. And of course, I think we already know in our heart, mind, soul, and spirit what it is. However, sometimes the world can be a little challenging. And good news, like I said before, we have a textual authority here, and it can really help guide us in staying on that straight path. And that's what we're shooting for here. Okay. And maybe if we set that kind of an example, maybe people will be drawn to the example of how we portray love for one another on a consistent basis. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope this has been edifying, and I hope you hear my heart on this. And I just also want to say thank you for being subscribers. Those of you who might want to become members, you can join. Those of you who are already members, thank you so much for joining. Those options are there for you. Whatever support you can lend, I greatly appreciate. All that said, even when you just watch these videos and leave a kind comment, that's greatly appreciated as well. I love encouraging comments. Whatever you can do in that regard is very helpful, and I really do appreciate that as well. And I want to thank you all. If you can share the videos too, if you think it's worth sharing, then please do. All of that is very helpful, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Thank you for taking the time to subscribe, and thank you for just being around and giving my interpretation an opportunity, a listen. I really appreciate that as well. Remember, do all things with grace and peace.